In this video, we'll cover the basics behind using Databricks Notebooks to perform your workflows. So we'll cover accessing notebooks, using those notebooks, and also how to manage your Databricks notebooks. So here I am, I'm logged into my Databricks workspace, and the first thing I'm going to do is to create a blank notebook. Now there's a couple of ways that I can do this. So I can use this shortcut on the home screen to create a blank notebook. I can also navigate to my workspace folder, and right here click on Create and also on Notebook. So I'll need to name the notebook, and then I'll need to choose a default language for the notebooks. Now one thing to note here is that Databricks Notebooks support multiple languages. That means that I can be in a notebook and using magic commands, I can write in Python, I can write in SQL, all within that same notebook. What I'm doing right here is just selecting the default language for this notebook that I'm creating. And I'll go ahead and select SQL. And then it'll ask me for the cluster that I'll be running these workloads on. So remember that every workload you run on Databricks is being powered by a cluster. In this case, I've already set up a cluster. So I'll go ahead and select this demo cluster and click on Create. So this is my notebook. There's currently one cell in this notebook. So now that I have my notebook, I'll go ahead and run a query in it. So I'll drop in my SQL command here, and there's a couple of things that I can do to run this. I can either click on this arrow, or I can just hit Shift and Enter, and it will go ahead and run that command. Each cell has a series of commands in the upper right-hand corner of that cell. So right here you can see that we can run just this cell, or we can run everything that came above this cell or anything below this cell. Here are some more management options. So here we can export our cell if we need to, move it up, move it down, etc. So that's pretty basic. That's just running a cell. What I will do is pull up a notebook that's a little bit more fleshed out. So here's an example of a notebook that has more content in there. So I'll just scroll through this. Now, in terms of managing the entire notebook, you'll want to use this navigation pane. Notice that because I just opened this notebook, it is not connected to a cluster. So I can go ahead and connect my notebook to a cluster right here. And then let's go through this navigation pane so that you can see some of this functionality. So under File, I can do things like create a new notebook, I can clone this notebook, I can rename this notebook, and so on and so forth. I can also export this notebook, and this is a great way for sharing notebooks. Notice that there's 3 different file types that are supported here. So I can export my notebook as a DBC archive, which is a Databricks format. I can export this as a source file and also as HTML. Under Edit, I can do things like cut or copy cells. I can move them up or down. I can also do a find and replace if I need to do that. And then View is just going to change the way that I am viewing my notebook. So right now I'm in standard view, but if I want to do a result only view, I can do that as well. Notice how that changes. Or if I wanted to do a side by side, I can also change that as well. Depending on the level of access that you have, you might or might not have access to this permissions button. By default, all users can create and modify workspace objects. That includes notebooks. That's unless an administrator enables workspace access control. Workspace access control is going to limit individual permissions and will determine your user abilities. So for example, in this workspace, I do not have administrator permissions. That's why I see that this permissions button is grayed out. An important feature behind Databricks Notebooks is this revision history. This revision history will keep track of all of the changes that were made in this notebook, and it also keeps track of who made those changes. Another thing to note about Databricks Notebooks is that they support real-time commenting. That means that I can select some code and leave a note for anyone that I'm working with. And if they want to later, they can go ahead and reply to me. Databricks Notebooks also come with built-in visualization options. So right here, I'm looking at this table. If I want to, I can click here and see this as a bar chart. If I want to see this as a table again, I can go and click on this button. But once I have a visualization, I also have options to customize that visualization. I can either choose different visualization types. So maybe I want to see this as a line chart. And with drag and drop functionality, I can also customize this visualization. One final thing to note here is that if I wanted to create a quick dashboard, I can go up to this View Standard, scroll to the bottom and click on New Dashboard, and then use drag and drop functionality to customize this dashboard. All right, this has been a quick introduction to Databricks Notebooks.